This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 35 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, September 2nd, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Westford Center section. Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Spaulding have returned from a pleasant vacation, going first to Old Orchard Beach and later to Portland, making from the latter place various shorter trips. Miss May Day has been assisting Miss Bunce at the library during college vacation days. May Day was in college at the time, and she would come back and become the head librarian at the library. Miss Mary E. Drew is at her Westford home after spending several months in Lowell and Cambridge. Joseph Knight passed his 73rd milestone of life's journey on Saturday of last week. On that day, Mr. and Mrs. Knight entertained a group of friends and relatives in honor of the occasion. A few years ago, Mr. Knight had a long, serious illness, but is comfortably well now. Best wishes for a continuance of the same from his friends. Mrs. Homer Seavey has been entertaining her mother and aunt, Mrs. Mitchell and Miss Pear of Cambridge, for a week's visit. State Supervisor of Assessors, Robert G. Patton, with headquarters at the State House, Boston, had his annual conference with our Board of Assessors at the Town Hall on Thursday of last week. The annual meeting of the WCTU, that's the Women's Christian Temperance Union, will be held with Mrs. Homer Seavey on Wednesday afternoon of next week. There will be business of importance, including the election of officers, and a full attendance of the members is urged. Sherman Fletcher, in company with Fred Hildreth of Malden, has been enjoying several days' vacation on a trip to western Massachusetts. About 25 members of Westford Grange attended the field day of the North Middlesex Pomona Grange last week Thursday at the Frank Foss Farm in Dracut. Good weather, a well-managed clam-bake dinner at noon, and a well-balanced program afterward of good speakers, readers, and singers made the outing a most successful one. The poles of the new electric lights are being distributed about the village, and a good number of our residents are having their houses wired for lighting. The regular services at the Congregational Church will be resumed on Sunday after the 3 weeks vacation. Miss Mary Morn has gone to Providence, Rhode Island for several weeks in her professional capacity. She was a nurse. George E. H. Abbott, whose death took place in Groton last week, formerly lived in Westford, the family home being where Walter J. Merritt now lives. The body was brought to Westford for interment in the family lot at Fairview. Mr. Abbott's father, Ephraim Abbott, was preceptor of Westford Academy for a number of years. The schools in town open next Tuesday morning. The Frost School and the Academy have been thoroughly put in order and some minor repairs made, preparatory to the opening of school. Next, we have the About Town section written by Samuel Law Taylor. Services at the Unitarian Church will commence on Sunday, September 3rd. A letter from Reverend Benjamin Bailey confirms the report of his resignation. He will continue with the parish until after the conference, which will be held with the First Parish on October 19th. His resignation is to take effect the following Sunday, which will make 8½ years of ministry with the parish, with the First Parish, Westford, and 50 years of loyal devotion to the faith of his father since his ordination at Dedham on March 14th, 1861. It's just about the time the Civil War started. David L. Grieg, the early sunrise farmer who makes the tree and vine to blow and abundance of grass to mow, has just returned from a vacation in rural New York. He owned the town or the farm that is located across Main Street from Westwood Cemetery. Mr. and Mrs. Abiel J. Abbott are touring in Maine and the provinces with their new Safety Speed automobile. Business on Oak Hill at the stone quarry of H.E. Fletcher and Company is about resuming old-time activities, having fallen heir to several contracts which will make stone chips more numerous than at any time this season. At the Bannister farm, they are raising turkeys, and the weasels are also raising them with much profit. Mrs. Prescott died on Thursday at the home of her son, George E. Prescott, at the John H. Decatur farm on the Lowell Road. The writer received a letter from an old-time neighbor, now farming in South Dakota, stating that he sowed 260 acres of wheat last spring, and the drought harvested it all. That beats the prairie farm drought. The edge is still all off business at the Brookside Mills. Nothing stirring, not even smoke out of the chimney. Miss Luana Decatur, who has been enjoying a 2-month vacation in California and visiting her uncle, Walter Decatur, and her sister, Miss Alma Decatur, has started on the return trip, arriving at the time of writing at Casco Bay, Maine. John and William Taylor were ushers at a church wedding in Cohasset last week Friday. It was the marriage of their friend, Professor J.O. Sallee, to Miss Mary Ellen Clapp. The two Taylor boys were sons of Samuel Taylor. The Prairie Farm has just finished harvesting a field of potatoes and reports about 2/3 of a crop as compared with previous years on the same field. The 40 varieties of California roses sent last spring by Alma Decatur to her Westford home on the Lowell Road are all in bloom and make fragrant the air and adorn the landscape of the Stony Brook Valley. The writer acknowledges the friendly remembrances in these roses. In this paper's issue of August 19th appeared a communication with a series of questions bearing upon socialism, which the correspondent of this column was invited to answer. When the writer arrived at the leisure time for the answering, with pen and ideas on hand, he was unable to find the paper with said questions in it, and has sent for a copy of the paper and will endeavor to reply next week, which he did, and we will read about. Mrs. Bannister has been enjoying the sea breezes of Massachusetts coast and the inland breezes of Arlington with her sister, Mrs. Crosby. Next, we have a death. The following item will be interesting to all who are interested in the history of Westford Academy. And this is a quote, so it must be taken from some other place. Dr. George Faulkner of Boston, who died on Sunday, was born in Billerica on July 14, 1819. His father, who died in 1843 at the age of 82 years, is believed to be the earliest manufacturer of woolens in this country. Dr. Faulkner was educated at the academies in Billerica and Westford. At the age of 15, he entered a store in Boston. He devoted himself to study, spent 1.25 years at Leicester and 1 year at Phillips Exeter Academy. Then he entered Harvard. Upon his graduation, he went to Keene, New Hampshire, and spent 1 year with the famous surgeon, Dr. Amos Twitchell. The day he received his degree in medicine, August 25, 1847, he was married to Miss Mary A. Spaulding of Billerica, and he immediately took up his residence in Jamaica Plain. His wife died in 1869, and in November of the following year, he married for his second wife, Miss Abby Adams. She died 11 years ago, and it was through liberal provision in her will, being a woman of ample means in her own right, that the Faulkner Hospital in Jamaica Plain was founded. End of the quoted passage. Next, we have the Graniteville section. All the schools in this village will reopen for the fall term on Tuesday, September 5th. There have been much-needed improvements made at the Sergeant School here, and workmen have been kept busy for several days getting it in readiness for the beginning of the school year. The entire sanitary system has been changed and modern plumbing installed, the work being done by the Brownville Mason Company of Fitchburg. P. Henry Harrington of Graniteville has done the woodwork. Fred Parker, who is the janitor of the building, is now having the different rooms thoroughly cleaned and necessary repairs made so that the interior will present a spick and span appearance. Owing to the rain on Tuesday, the work of fixing up the grounds at St. Catherine's Church could not be done, but was done on Thursday. Many of the men of the parish worked hard to have the place fixed up. Mrs. Albert R. Wall and little daughter Mary of this village are visiting in Beachmont and other beaches. Mrs. Edward Lafore and son Gerald of this village will leave here today for a trip to Canada. Gideon P. Leduc, wife and son, have returned from Canada, whence they were called on account of the death of Mrs. Leduc's father. Next is the Forge Village section. Holy Communion services will be held at St. Andrew's Mission tomorrow morning at 8:15. Evening prayer at 4:30 o'clock. Miss Abby M. Blaisdell is the guest this week of Mr. and Mrs. James Wilson. Mrs. Frank Camplin of Lawrence was the guest of Mr. and Mrs. Edward Hunt at their home on last Sunday. Mr. and Mrs. James May have just returned from a visit with relatives in East Boston. Daniel Sullivan of Boston is visiting at the home of Mr. and Mrs. John Sullivan. Mrs. John Daly has returned from New York, where she has been the guest of her sister, Mrs. Donald Holt. Oliver Byron has purchased the property of A. Karkin, located on Story Street. Miss Stella Karkin is enjoying her vacation of 2 weeks. She is entertaining her friend, Miss Millie Brazel of Gardner, this week. Gerald Daly of Fitchburg has returned after a most pleasant visit with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hugh Daly. Mr. and Mrs. William Murphy of Lowell, who have spent the summer at their camp on the shores of Forge Pond, entertained their friends at a dance in Abbott Hall on Saturday evening. Music for dancing was furnished by the Manhattan Orchestra of Lowell. Among those present were many from Lowell, Lawrence, Belmont, Malden, Concord, Acton, Boston, and this village. Probably many of those were people that lived in those towns that are mentioned, but had summer cottages on Forge Pond. Mrs. Carey, together with Mr. and Mrs. Watson, are spending a few weeks camping on the shores of Forge Pond. Martin Shannon and Miss Hildreth of Cambridge are the guests of Mr. and Mrs. James Wilson. They are also entertaining James, Joseph, Timothy, Francis, and John Sullivan of Nashua, New Hampshire. Miss Gertrude Dawson of Lowell has returned home after a very pleasant vacation of 3 months at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. The Mrs. Agnes and Ella Donovan and Mary Ward of Roxbury returned home the latter part of the week after a vacation of 3 weeks. Mr. and Mrs. Dwight H. Wolf of Kansas City, Missouri, who are on an 8,000-mile walk for the benefit of Mr. Wolf's health, passed through this village at 1 o'clock on Tuesday on their way to Fitchburg. At the center, the travelers stopped for refreshments and also offered a number of postcards for sale. Their pony and cart, with its numerous tags and postals, attracted considerable attention, as also did their faithful dog. Their passing was mentioned both in Forge Village and Graniteville. Cameron School will reopen Tuesday, September 5th. John Spinner has returned home after a visit of 2 months with relatives in England. Miss Della Drake spent Wednesday visiting relatives in Lowell. Mrs. George Sanborn and daughter Mabel spent Tuesday in Boston. While fishing Monday afternoon, John Catchpole, good name for a fisherman, met with a very painful injury, the hook becoming embedded in Mr. Catchpole's finger. He was attended by Dr. Cyril Blaney of Westford. Robert McArdle of Manchester, New Hampshire, was the guest over Sunday of his daughter and son-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. John Burnett. Abbott Worsted Company's mill will resume operation on Tuesday morning, September 5th. Next item is from Groton. It's an obituary, but it's an obituary of a man that has Westford connections. George E. H. Abbott, for 40 years a resident of this town, that is Groton, died at his home on Main Street Thursday evening, August 24th, after a long period of gradually failing health, although his final illness was of only a week's duration. Mr. Abbott was the last survivor of his father's family. He was the son of Reverend Ephraim and Abigail Whiting Bancroft Abbott, and was born at Westford on February 15, 1838. He was educated at Westford Academy and Harvard College, entering the latter institution in his sophomore year in 1857, and graduated with the War Cries of 1860. His father was a graduate of Harvard in the class of 1806, and his grandfather, Dr. Amos Bancroft of this town, Groton, in the class of 1791. From his stepmother, Mr. Abbott had inherited a large and valuable library from which he derived much pleasure and recreation, and among his books most of his life was passed in quiet retirement, although he has at times done some land surveying and tutoring, and for 1 year after graduating from college taught school at Westford. In 1870, after his father's death, he, with his mother and 2 sisters, removed from Westford to Groton, which has since been his home. His mother died in 1886, and his sisters, both unmarried, died in 1908, since which Mr. Abbott has lived alone and been cared for by a housekeeper. He never married. The funeral services were held at the late home at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and the burial was in the family lot in Westford Cemetery. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending September 2nd, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.